Usually when you bite into a fresh slice of lemon, there is this immediate, undeniable reality to the experience.
Right.
Your eyes water, your jaw
Oh,
tingle.
yeah, your whole mouth puckers up.
Exactly. It is undeniably sour. And if someone standing next to you casually mentioned that, sourness doesn't actually exist anywhere in the physical universe, you would probably assume that they were completely out of their mind.
Oh, absolutely. You'd think they were crazy.
But in this deep dive, we are venturing into the territory of epistemology, which is basically the philosophy of how we know what we actually know.
It's a fascinating area to get lost in.
It really is. And
Mm.
today, we are exploring this incredible unifying framework from the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily. It's known as the ideal experience doctrine, or in Arabic, Madhab al-Tajriba al-Mithaliya.
Right.
And his core argument here is that the sourness of that lemon, or like the warmth of the sun, or the smell of your morning coffee, none of those are objective properties of the universe at all. They are elaborate illusions manufactured entirely by your own body.
Yeah. And it forces this complete reevaluation of what you and I actually consider to be reality. I mean, Al-Waily is stepping into a debate that has essentially been raging for thousands of years.
Right, the classic ping pong match of truth.
Exactly. Before we can fully grasp his doctrine, we have to kind of look at the fundamental problem he's trying to solve. Historically, thinkers have been trapped in this binary argument about the mechanics of truth. Like, do we extract truth from the external world using our physical senses? Or is truth something generated internally, by the rational mechanics of the mind?
Right, so it's that tug of war between subjective perception and objective reality. And you see this start way back with the ancient Greeks.
Oh, yeah.
You have figures like Protagoras arguing that man is the measure of all things. Like, if a breeze feels cold to you, well, it's cold. If it feels warm to me, it's warm.
Yeah, which means the mechanism of truth is entirely subjective.
Yeah.
Which, makes building any sort of consensus or scientific foundation almost impossible.
Totally. Which is why you get the inevitable counter-movement from Aristotle.
Right. Aristotle steps in and insists, no, we can extract universal objective truths. But his mechanism still relies heavily on the senses. He believed in looking at the physical world, gathering massive amounts of empirical data, and using induction to figure out the underlying rules.
So Aristotle anchors reality in what we can actually observe.
Exactly. But as history progresses into the Middle Ages, the mechanism for finding truth shifts dramatically toward the divine. Thinkers like St. Augustine come along and argue that human observation is fundamentally flawed without divine illumination.
Wait, so he's saying you can't even do science without it?
Basically, yeah. For Augustine, faith isn't just a religious concept. It is an epistemological prerequisite. He essentially argues that there is no science without faith, because the human mind just cannot process ultimate truth on its own.
That's wild. But then the Islamic Golden Age provides this fascinating structural counter-argument, specifically through the Mutazilites.
Right, they flip the script entirely.
They really do. They strip away that reliance on unquestioning faith and instead champion rational doubt as the primary tool for knowledge. There is this amazing concept from one of their key figures, Al-Nazam. He said that the doubter is closer to the truth than the denier.
I love that quote. It's so modern.
Isn't it? It establishes doubt not as a weakness, but as an active mechanical bridge. Like, you cannot cross from a state of ignorance to a state of absolute belief without first passing through the crucible of skepticism.
And that concept of skepticism sets the stage perfectly for the modern epistemological crisis. Like, this is where the binary problem really crystallizes between René Descartes and John Locke.
Ah, the heavyweights.
Right. Descartes takes that Mutazilite idea of doubt and just pushes it to its absolute logical extreme. He decides the only way to find a solid foundation for a reality is to actively doubt everything his senses tell him.
Every single thing.
Everything. He doubts his vision, his memory, the existence of the physical room he is sitting in, all of it, until he hits the bedrock of his own consciousness.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. It's a mechanical conclusion. Even if every sensory input is a lie, the engine processing the lie, his rational mind, must exist. Therefore, innate rational logic is the only trusted code.
But then Locke hits back by attacking the idea of innate code. He introduces the blank slate argument, right?
Yeah, the tabula rasa.
Right. Locke argues that if human beings were born with innate logical algorithms, a toddler would intuitively understand complex mathematics or advanced logic. But they don't. Locke argues that every single concept we possess has to be painfully imported through the doorway of our five senses.
It's all about raw data.
Yeah. So to use an analogy, it's like Descartes and the rationalists believe we can only trust the operating system running the computer, while Locke and the empiricists believe we can only trust the raw data being typed into the keyboard.
It's a great way to put it. And then, of course, David Hume and Immanuel Kant come along and point out the fatal flaws in both of those systems.
Because philosophy is just a series of people ruining the last guy's theory.
Pretty much. Hume argues that the sensory data being typed into the keyboard is deeply unreliable. I mean, he says we can't even prove cause and effect with our senses. We just observe one event happening after another, and we assume they are connected.
Right.
Kant tries to salvage the situation by arguing we actually need both the raw sensory data and the innate mental categories like space and time to organize that data. But Kant ultimately concedes a really depressing point. Because we are trapped behind our sensory filters, we can never know the thing in itself.
The actual true reality.
Right. We can never experience the true, unfiltered reality of the universe.
Which brings us back to the core of Al-Waily's ideal experience doctrine. If we are trapped behind these sensory filters and the physical world feels disconnected from the rational mind, how does he actually fix this? How does he bridge the gap?
Well, he bridges it by attacking the fundamental assumption that mind and matter are actually different substances.
The classic mind-body problem.
Exactly. If the physical universe is made of dead, dumb rock, and human consciousness is a non-physical rational entity, how do they interact? Like, how does a non-physical thought cause my physical arm to raise?
It's the ghost in the machine?
Right. Al-Waily solves this by deducing that they must ultimately be made of the exact same fundamental material. He introduces the concept of mental atoms.
Okay, let's unpack this concept of mental atoms, because this is where the doctrine really shifts the paradigm. When he says matter is mental, I mean, he doesn't mean a piece of quartz is literally having thoughts about its existence, right?
No, he is not suggesting that inanimate matter possesses, like, human consciousness. He is arguing that the foundational building blocks of the universe, whether that is a photon, an electron, whatever the smallest indivisible unit of reality happens to be, those possess a fundamentally mental nature.
Okay, so at the absolute microscopic level.
Yes. In isolation, these mental atoms are incredibly simple. They are in a state of rest. But because the entire universe is constructed from this single unified substance, the totality of existence functions as one cohesive entity. Al-Waily calls this the general mind.
So the general mind is literally the universe as a whole operating as a single unified system.
Yes, and from the perspective of that general mind, the universe is pure idealism. It is simply thinking itself into existence.
Yeah.
All of reality is just the internal processing of this massive unified structure.
Whoa.
Right. But the crucial shift happens when those simple mental atoms group together into highly complex biological configurations, like a human being or an animal. Al-Waily calls these localized configurations partial minds.
Partial minds, which means we are essentially tiny localized clusters of the universe's processing power, experiencing the rest of the universe from the inside.
Exactly. And that creates a radical shift in perspective. To the general mind, everything is internal code. But to a partial mind, to us, the rest of the universe appears as an objective, external, physical reality. Because we are localized, we have to bump into things, navigate environments, and gather data empirically.
Let me try a framing here to see if the mechanics of this hold up.
Go for it.
It sounds similar to the architecture of like a massive multiplayer video game, to the server running the game, which represents the general mind, the entire environment, the physics engine, the weather systems. They are all just lines of code. It is entirely conceptual and mental.
Yes, perfectly stated.
But to us, playing inside the game as the player character, the partial mind, the rules of the game are a hard physical reality. Like a digital wall is just code to the server. But to the character, it is an objective barrier that you will crash into if you run too fast. You are bound by the empirical rules of the environment.
That framing highlights the dual nature of his doctrine perfectly. The architecture of the universe is idealistic, but the localized experience of navigating it requires empiricism. But this brings up the most fascinating mechanical question in Al-Waily's work.
Right.
If the player character is navigating this universe of mental atoms, how exactly are they perceiving it? Because the universe we experience is full of colors, sounds, and temperatures.
And this is where we get back to the lemon from the intro. If the universe is just a matrix of mental atoms interacting, where does the sourness come from? Where does the heat of a fire come from?
Al-Waily answers this by splitting the properties of the universe into two distinct categories. He calls them primary qualities and secondary qualities, and the dividing line between them is purely biological.
Okay, lay them out for me.
So primary qualities are the only things that objectively exist in the external environment. According to Al-Waily, there are only three: light, movement, and extension.
Extension meaning like the physical space an object occupies?
Exactly. It's geometry. If every biological entity in the universe were suddenly wiped out, those three things, light, movement, and extension, would continue to exist.
Which implies that everything else we experience, every color, sound, flavor, and temperature, is a secondary quality.
Exactly.
Right.
Secondary qualities do not exist in the external universe. They are entirely manufactured by biological evolution. They are basically sensory user interfaces designed for one specific purpose: to keep the biological organism alive.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on this, specifically with the concept of heat.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the heat is just a biological alarm system manufactured in my head, and the fire itself is just movement and extension, why does the fire still burn a piece of paper that doesn't have a biological alarm system? The paper turns to ash regardless of whether a human is watching.
It's a great question. We have to distinguish between structural breakdown and the actual sensation of heat. The fire is indeed extreme, rapid molecular movement. When that extreme movement comes into contact with the molecular extension of the paper, the physical bonds of the paper are violently broken apart. That structural deterioration is an objective interaction of primary qualities, movement, altering extension.
So the destruction is real.
Yes, the paper structurally disintegrates, but the paper doesn't feel hot.
Ah, I see. So the structural damage is real, but the painful feeling of burning that is the secondary quality.
Precisely. If a human touches that same extreme molecular movement, our biological cells also begin to structurally disintegrate. But evolution realized that organisms that quietly sit there while their cells disintegrate well, they don't survive to pass on their genes.
No, they do not.
So the nervous system evolved a translation mechanism. It takes the objective reality of extreme physical movement and translates it into the subjective, agonizing sensation of burning heat. The pain is not a property of the fire. The pain is a highly effective biological command telling you to pull your hand away immediately before your extension is destroyed.
Wow, which means the exact same logic applies to taste and smell.
Totally.
The sweetness of sugar isn't an objective property of the molecular structure. The body just analyzes that specific physical arrangement, recognizes that it contains highly useful, dense calories, and then basically paints it with a pleasant, sweet flavor to encourage you to consume it.
Yes. And bitterness operates as the inverse. It is literally a biological siren warning you that a specific molecular arrangement is toxic or harmful to your hardware.
It's like a warning label.
Exactly.
No.
Even sound is just a biological interpretation of movement, specifically vibrations moving through the air. The ear translates those vibrations into audio so we can, detect approaching predators or communicate with our group.
So if we strip away the biological user interface, the universe is a profoundly alien place.
Very alien.
I mean, without biological ears, noses, or taste buds, the universe is entirely silent. It is completely odorless and tasteless. It is just a vast, dark architecture of pure movement, light, and geometry. Our bodies are constantly painting the world with this rich tapestry of sensations just to successfully navigate the physical space.
Which is an incredible feat of evolution. But it introduces a massive epistemological vulnerability.
Oh, because of the sensory filters.
Right. If our entire moment-to-moment experience of reality is heavily filtered through a biological survival manual, how can we possibly trust our senses to discover absolute objective truth?
We can't. The user interface is designed for survival, not for absolute accuracy.
Exactly. Al-Waily uses a very specific logical proof for this, which we can call the four men problem.
Okay, what's that?
He argues that if you sit in a quiet room and rationally deduce that 2 + 2 = 4, you've arrived at an absolute truth. There is zero vulnerability in that mathematical equation.
Right, it's just pure logic.
But if you rely on your sensory interface and you look across the street and see 4 men standing on the corner, you cannot claim absolute epistemological certainty that 4 men are actually there.
Because the biological hardware is prone to glitching.
Exactly. Al-Waily points out the numerous causes of sensory error. Like, you might actually be looking at 2 men, but your vision is distorted. You could be under the influence of a toxin. You could be suffering from an illness that causes double vision.
Or you might just be looking through a warped pane of glass.
Exactly. Because the empirical data has to travel through a biological lens, and that lens can be altered, degraded, or tricked. Empirical observation can never achieve the absolute flawless certainty of pure rational deduction.
It's like comparing the fundamental laws of physics to a camera lens.
I like that.
The laws of physics exist independently and flawlessly. But if you try to observe the world through a camera, that lens can be smudged by dirt, it can be cracked by the environment, or distorted by a software glitch. You can never base absolute truth solely on the image produced by a vulnerable lens.
That's a perfect analogy. And this is why Al-Waily aligns with the rationalists, like Descartes, when it comes to absolute certainty. Pure rational axioms like the laws of mathematics are the only undeniable truths because they are independent of the biological sensory interface.
Right.
However, Al-Waily introduces a really fascinating caveat here when it comes to the realm of ethics.
Oh, interesting.
Because one might assume that if math is an innate rational axiom, then fundamental moral laws like the concept of justice or do not steal must also be innate rational code.
But the source material suggests they aren't. Al-Waily argues that ethical axioms are not innate.
Right. He draws heavily on the evolutionary perspective here, aligning with thinkers who viewed morality as a product of social utility. Al-Waily argues that ethical rules are actually empirical habits.
Empirical habits?
Yeah, think about it. If we go back tens of thousands of years to early human tribes, they empirically observed that groups where members constantly murdered and stole from each other had a terrible survival rate.
Yeah, that's bad for group cohesion.
Right. So through brutal trial and error, they realized that cooperation and mutual respect actually produced a higher social utility.
So morality isn't pre-programmed into the universe. It is just a highly successful survival strategy.
Yes. And over immense spans of evolutionary time, that specific empirical habit became so deeply ingrained in the human psychological architecture that it now feels like an innate, absolute axiom. Like, we feel a visceral internal objection to theft or murder. But Al-Waily argues the origin of that feeling is empirical. It's born from the survival necessities of the partial mind interacting with other partial minds.
This tension between the flawless rational mind and the flawed but absolutely necessary sensory interface leads to a massive cognitive challenge, though.
How so?
Well, if our senses are just a smudged camera lens, but we still have to use them to navigate the physical world and survive, how do we actually build accurate, reliable knowledge? Like, how does a child learn what a tree is if they can't trust their eyes perfectly?
Oh, right. This is where Al-Waily details the cognitive mechanics of universals. He agrees with Locke's blank slate theory to an extent. When a human is born, their partial mind does not contain a preloaded magical concept of a tree. The child has to physically go out into the world and use their imperfect sensory interface to gather data.
Okay, so the child goes outside, looks at an oak tree, and the brain takes in that specific sensory data.
Right. And then the next day, they see a pine tree.
Right.
The next week, a palm tree. Suddenly, the brain is confronted with an enormous amount of highly specific, messy empirical data. The oak tree has broad leaves and rough bark. The pine tree has needles. The palm tree is incredibly tall with a smooth trunk. If the brain tried to store every single unique iteration as a completely separate category of reality, it would be completely overwhelmed.
Right. It's an information bottleneck. The system needs a way to compress the data.
Exactly. And the mechanism for that data compression is the creation of universals.
Yeah.
The rational mind takes all those individual sensory snapshots and begins systematically stripping away the specific differences. It deletes the specific shape of the leaf. It deletes the exact texture of the bark. It strips away the height. It isolates only the core structural denominators that all those objects share. And from that stripped-down data, it constructs a neutral composite idea.
Oh, wow.
That the composite is the universal concept of a tree.
That is a brilliant synthesis, because the universal idea of a tree doesn't actually exist anywhere in the physical world.
No, not at all.
You can never point to a universal tree. You can only point to a specific oak or a specific pine. The universal is a purely rational construction, but it is built entirely out of raw empirical data.
Exactly. Which brings us to the very title of his work, the ideal experience doctrine. Al-Waily essentially takes the centuries-old ping-pong match of epistemology and forces a unification.
It's ideal because the fundamental architecture of the universe is a single mental unity, the general mind. But it is anchored in experience because localized biological entities, the partial minds, must use empirical observation and sensory data to survive, navigate, and build universal concepts out of a complex physical reality.
You nail it. Descartes was right about the certainty of the rational mind, and Locke was right about the necessity of sensory experience. Al-Waily just built the mechanical framework where both operate simultaneously, governed by the harsh rules of evolutionary biology.
It is a framework that brilliantly reconciles the abstract nature of philosophy with the practical mechanics of how we actually live and learn. I mean, we are rational engines driving vehicles made of sensory illusions.
That's beautifully put.
Well, to quickly summarize the territory we've covered today, we started with the historical epistemological dilemma, the battle between objective reality and subjective perception. We explored how Al-Waily bridges the mind-body gap by introducing mental atoms and the general mind. We broke down how our biological hardware manufactures secondary qualities like heat and taste purely for survival. And finally, we looked at how our rational minds compress messy empirical data into clean, universal concepts.
It is a lot to process, and it really challenges the fundamental ways we interact with the world. But I want to leave you with a different angle to ponder, something that builds on this idea of biological user interfaces.
Ooh, all right, lay it on us.
If every color, sound, and flavor we experience is just an evolutionary trick to keep our soft biological bodies alive, what happens when we eventually create artificial general intelligence?
Oh,
Think about it. If we build a conscious, rational mind that does not require calories, does not need to reproduce, and cannot feel physical pain, what will the universe look like to that entity? Without a biological survival manual painting the world with illusions, will an AI be the first mind to actually experience the silent, dark, objective reality of the general mind?
that is a staggering thought to end on. An AI wouldn't see an apple as sweet or red. It would just perceive the raw geometry and movement of the atoms. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ideal experience doctrine. Keep questioning the reality around you, and we will catch you on the next one.